Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. 2, because I'm a fan of punk music. And 3, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview.
Before we do that, I'd like to say a big thank you to the folks at Amplexor for sponsoring my podcast for the coming month. Amplexor is preparing to launch a really exciting virtual series called Ignite Revenue Through Content, which will feature leading speakers and thinkers in short, punchy, and thought-provoking bi-monthly episodes, exploring and highlighting insights and best practices of how to leverage content as a strategic differentiator. It'll run from August through mid-December, and kicking it off on August the 20th will be yours truly, talking about unleashing your inner punk, a rebellious take on customer engagement. I think the session that we've organized will be awesome. In fact, it's a real honor to be asked to do it, and I'm really looking forward to it. So go to amplexor.com and search for Ignite Revenue Through Content. To find out more, register for free, and to check out the full agenda. Go register today, and I hope to see you there. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that. Let's get back into the interview.
So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Dean Robison, who is the SVP of Technical Support at ServiceNow. Hey, Dean, how are you doing?
Excellent, Adrian. How are you?
I am very well, sir. I'm very well. In fact, no, Dean, I am splendid. That's what I'm saying. So Dean, for the benefit of our listeners and also people that might check out the written up highlights, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and also about the work that you do?
Sure. I think I'm probably a little unique here in Silicon Valley by any measure. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a Marine, I'm a goat farmer. I live in Gilroy, California. I've got a couple acres down here and just over 70 dairy goats at the moment.
Nice.
So it makes me a little unique, a gentleman farmer in my off hours, if you will. My day job, however, is leading support for ServiceNow, and I've been there for just over 3 years. Awesome company, awesome opportunity. It feels like a rocket ship. I know that feeling because I was with Salesforce in the early days, starting back in 2002 for a 13-year run, leading parts of services, leading support, leading M&A integration for Salesforce back then, and I feel like we've kind of captured the magic all over again here with ServiceNow.
No, perfect. Now, we connected a wee while ago, and we were talking about the pandemic and how it's had a massive impact on service and support teams. And as you've said, is something that runs a support team for ServiceNow, but you support large organizations, but you still run a large support organization. I mean, what I wanted to do, what I was really keen to do, is just to explore some of the things that you've learned, some of the things that you found challenging over the last kind of few months, if that was okay.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's been a heck of a run here since March. Everything went up. The bubble went up, if you will, come around March 9th. And at that point, we were 9 different support centers around the world with just about 1,000 people operating in those support centers. And then overnight, we're in about 1,000 different homes and apartments around the world, and still delivering on our support mission and trying to keep everything going.
thing I wanted to do before I kind of jump into it was, rather than just jumping into it, was to actually kind of say, actually, how are you? How are you dealing with things? How are you coping? Because it seems to me also that there's a lot of people being told to kind of help support their frontline, employees and their customers, and so they can support the customers and things. But I'm not really sure many people are checking in on the supervisors, the team leaders, or the managers, or the leaders. So how are you doing, Dean?
Oh, I appreciate you asking, Adrian. It has not been an easy couple of months, even on the home front. Even in the best of days, if there were no pandemic going on, it would have been a trying couple of months for me.
Mm.
Some things on the home front, um, and my own health, and kind of taking care of that as I get older here. So there were definitely some things swirling in the background that added some spice to everything that was going on. But in the grand scheme of things, I'm healthy, I'm happy, kids are doing okay, and there is some benefit to sheltering in place and kind of working from home and eating right, having time to exercise, and not being in the car on a long commute day in and day out, that I've definitely taken advantage of, and got myself into quite a good, healthy routine here that I think has really helped me weather through this, because it is a marathon. It is not a sprint.
Perfect. I mean, that's great to hear. So what particularly from a work perspective, what have been some of the biggest challenges that you and your team have faced in the last few months?
Yeah, it's changed. What was once an issue or a challenge as we were starting to get into this versus what kind of the current issues are, they're very different, and things morphed over this time. When we got started into this, it was all about getting people productive and in place and connected. And with all of these teams around the world, not every country's infrastructure is the same.
Right.
And really having to pay attention to getting people set up appropriately in their homes to operate over a protracted period of time. So that was kind of the initial focus.
And so to do that, was that about, did you have to go into making sure they had the right sort of setup, sort of ergonomics and desks and chairs and stuff, as well as connectivity and equipment?
Exactly.
Right.
All of that. So I'll give you a couple examples. Things like, our company expense policy wasn't necessarily written to support our rapid, deployment into our homes. So getting our employees a special stipend for an ergonomic chair or a work desk or something like, those are things we need to tackle. In Hyderabad, where we have one of our larger support centers, many of our employees rely on public transportation.
Right.
Well, getting monitors home so they could have a nice, productive 2-monitor setup. If you're a young employee in Hyderabad and trying to navigate public transportation with 2 monitors, wasn't really an option, at least not a safe option. So we needed to get creative, around expensing an Uber or expensing a taxi and getting people home safely with all the appropriate gear. So yeah, we were twisting and turning and morphing on the fly in the early days.
Wow. And so how have things changed then now? Because that's kind of like, that's you butting up against a thing that which is, completely unusual, and then kind of like reacting to it. So how are things morphed now? What are the kind of the big things now?
Yeah, so now the big change is taking care of the people.
Right.
Mental health challenges, fatigue challenges. These are the things that we're really kind of coming to grips with at the moment, because we're going to be doing this for the foreseeable future. And with all of the local governments really struggling with this, as well as, how fast do they open and what do they close, and what's going to happen with school if you're a parent of school-age children this fall. These are things that we're helping our employees cope with, coming up with options and alternatives, whether it's flexible hours, flexible work environments, trying to prioritize getting some people back into an office where necessary if the infrastructure they're depending on wasn't built or isn't convenient to operate over the long haul. Right. These are things that we're dealing with at the moment.
And that's kind of it's kind of fascinating, because I always kind of thought that that's one of the big things that would kind of well up, because there's some big assumptions around this massive and very rapid move to remote, which was very necessary. But actually, what it didn't take account of necessarily is one, the personality side of things and what people get from being kind of on site and with colleagues. Some personalities are better suited to working on their own and remotely than maybe others are. And also, there's also this other sort of social benefit that comes from, particularly if you're working in support, is that if you're dealing with a tough issue and maybe an irate customer, having your buddies or your teammates around you, people just know that you're having a tough time, and
That's right.
They're going to look after you. But if you're working remote in your own kind of home office or so, then that can feel really isolated, and it's kind of hard to figure out how you support people, or how do you recognize somebody's having a hard time, as it were.
For sure. It takes those empathy skills, that you try to hone as a leader and puts them on steroids. I feel super fortunate. I've got my wife, I've got my 2 college age boys who they're not at college right now. They've been at home for a protracted period of time here and getting ready to get back into school, but they've been here, and it's nice to have a family meal with all 4 of us and help chores around the farm. Well, some of these folks in my team around the world, their only family is their work family, and they're incredibly isolated, and doing everything we possibly can to stay connected with them and provide kind of social outlets and alternatives virtually for these employees is something, the company has done a very good job supplying, whether it's trivia nights or yoga or you name it. We offer a lot of what we're hoping is sufficient social outlets for these folks to stay connected. But then also, it assumes that you kind of know who your friends are or where to find help in the company. I really worry about the new hires, and we've been hiring a lot. And so that cultural sheep dip, that onboarding, knowing who's who, when you've never shaken anyone's hand, you've never kind of been in a conference room with anybody before. These are uncharted waters for us.
Yeah, and I think I was speaking to another CEO the other day, and he was talking about, he reflected that the interesting thing about this kind of period, he said, we do a lot of these Zoom kind of chats. He says, but I've been speaking to lots of kind of people that I know, but he says, over the last 6 months, I've not made any new friends.
Right. Yeah.
And I was a bit like, it's so obvious as a reflection, but I was like, wow, that's so true, right? And I think that is right. But you talked about the onboarding because you continue to hire and things. But I was thinking about this idea that things are changing kind of rapidly, and you talked about probably working remotely for a protracted period. I mean, does that mean that you're redesigning your employee experience on the fly, or are you having to now get intentional about it?
Probably a little bit of both. I mean, necessity is the mother of invention, and some of these issues and challenges that we're facing today, we didn't even know they existed 2 months ago. So we are adapting on the fly. A great example of that is having a new hire mentor network created in Slack, right? So the ability to dive into a Slack channel at a moment's notice and get kind of that expert help and that expert guidance. We didn't have that 3 months ago because that expert was probably a cube away. You pop up, you ask that question, you pop back down. Well, you don't have that luxury anymore. But you make a very good point. We are starting to be very intentional now about what some of these processes are going to look like for the long haul. Because I don't think we're ever going to go back exactly the way it was. We were a very office-focused culture.
Yeah,
that's not going to be what's going to be in the future for us. Likely a much more of a remote hybrid with offices available to our employees. So now what? What about new hire?
Well, exactly. I mean, because I've been thinking about this. I think that the hybrid is a word I've been using, because we've got companies now that are starting to plan, or starting to think about trying to bring people back, or starting to plan for that, but then are having to stay flexible depending on how things develop. And I think what's absolutely kind of true is that there will be another, in air quotes, sort of crisis of some sorts,
Sure.
whether that's another spike in infections, whether it's natural or social unrest or terror or another health scare or whatever it might be. At some point in the future, there will be something else that we have to respond to. And I guess the hybrid model has, you've got to be really intentional about that, and it probably needs to be really quite well thought through in terms of what sort of push and pull sort of elements are to it. It's like, is somebody always going to be remote, or is it going to be, do you want them remote sometimes and then on site other times, and what are the things that drive that, if you know what I mean?
That's right. No, absolutely. And we're seeing it manifest in the realization of an employee is like, all right, I don't necessarily need to be going back into the office to be productive. Therefore, why am I living close to an office? Why not go some other location? Might be more affordable, good connectivity, access to an airport type of thing. But why do I need to be right here in this middle of this city? And what does that now mean? Like, what policies do we have? Do we allow that? And how do you adjust salaries and bonuses to accommodate the new market they might be living in? Those are things that we're facing head on right now.
Right. And the thing that I was also kind of thinking about was, because I wanted to circle back on that, on some of the agent stuff with that, the move to remote and the kind of the wear and tear of employees, because you talked about this idea about having new hires budgeted up with somebody that's a mentor that might be kind of like 2 desks away, as it were.
Right.
And the thing I was talking to somebody, a gentleman called Nick Miskovitz, who works at Pura Vida. They make bracelets and things that they source from artisans mainly in Puerto Rico, and they were talking about this idea of actually getting their agents who were then working remotely to get in the support team to establish a new routine, because it's interesting how when you're in the office, it's the routine that emerges. When it's people take coffee breaks, or when it's going to be lunchtime or the end of the day, and so on and so forth. Whereas at home, you don't necessarily have those informal boundaries. Do you know what I mean?
That's right.
And again, and he was saying, we've been encouraging people to, define their own pattern, because otherwise you end up bleeding into the rest of the day, or you don't exercise, you don't take a break, you don't kind of, have lunch, you don't kind of do this, you don't do that, all of these different sort of things. And I just wanted to get your take on that. Is that something you've encouraged your people to do as well?
No, actually, I think we're going the opposite way, that we're going to try to replicate, and this is just from a predictability and a scheduling and a capacity management standpoint.
Right.
We're trying to instill some structure so people can depend on a time block that they can go work out. They can they can, go re-energize, go take that walk, go grab some lunch. And they don't need to feel like they're always on or always accessible or always available. So I think we're trying to buffer our employees with a little bit more structure, a little bit more rigor that they can depend on, so they can plan around that and schedule their days. Now, having said that, there are going to be some exceptions in every geo, every market, based on some pretty volatile conditions at home, whether elder care, child care, someone sick in the family, you name it. So we want to be able to flex for those type of unfortunate scenarios. But otherwise, I think we're going the opposite way of trying to replicate the stability of an office environment from our homes.
Right. Okay. So it'll be almost like being organized around predicted demand in many ways, and let people self-organize, in face of that demand.
That's right.
Cool. And I guess the other thing I wanted to ask was, like, I've seen also a lot of people when they've moved to remote working, managers and team leaders have been, they've used sort of walking the floor, as it were, and having big screens in the office with kind of like real-time data around where they're at with CSAT or NPS or numbers of calls or number of emails in a queue and so on and so forth. All that sort of like stuff. It's very visual, right? And the on-site kind of like, listening to calls or call sampling, all that type of stuff. And that's the idea of maintaining standards and performance in a remote environment is actually very different. And I'd be interested to figure out kind of like what you've done in terms of responding to that. Because I've heard some really great things, and everything from people just going, you know what, we trust you, crack on, do the right thing for the right reasons, to people just kind of like buying lots of new technology and surveilling the heck out of people. But the former really, really good, and the latter done really badly is like a horror show.
Sure.
And I just wanted to understand kind of what you guys have done in terms of how have you tried to maintain standards and performance kind of in this new operating kind of model?
So we've got the benefit, I believe, of we're not a high volume kind of a consumer facing traditional call center. So that's a good thing. Ours very technical, very in-depth troubleshooting, on our technology. Now, the other thing, shameless plug for ServiceNow's capabilities. We use our own technology, and thank God, right? We benefit greatly from it, from that seamless connectivity and that single pane of glass. Everybody can kind of see what's going on and collaborate very, very effectively. So that works well in our favors. So yes, our supervisors, our managers, they refer to their dashboards often during the day, for sure.
Right.
But rather than that walk the floor, kind of pop into a queue, put on the headset with a Y splitter type of thing, it's now much more of a virtualized capability through video conferencing, setting expectations with the customer that, hey, somebody else is going to be joining our call right now. My manager is going to be sitting in and maybe helping troubleshoot or ensuring that I'm doing the right thing. So just being very transparent with our customers in that way. But no, I think otherwise, a lot of the old muscle, a lot of the things that got us to where we are today are still holding. We just got to be a little creative in how we do that in a virtual way.
Yeah. And I guess because everybody's going to respond in different ways. And I guess the other dimension, I think we sort of alluded to it right at the very beginning, was that one of the things everybody's been talking about, supporting the employees, helping them do the right sort of like the right work and maintain standards and everything else. But the shift in how we do that, the rapid shift to remote, and then with us edging towards more of a hybrid kind of model. The thing that's been striking me, we talk about customer experience, we talk about employee experience, and the thing that's been striking kind of me recently is, do we need to start talking about leadership or management experience or manager experience? Because if we're asking all these managers and team leaders and leaders to look after their people, it struck me as like going, who's looking after them? And do we need to think about them, given that we've had such a massive change in how we do things? So, how have you been doing that?
It's a great question. And I think we had a little bit of a perfect storm in a positive way at ServiceNow that really hit at the right time. So as you're probably aware, we just had a new CEO come in. Beginning of the year, Bill McDermott, amazing leader, great track record in B2B enterprise software. And he looked at ServiceNow, rapidly rising rocket ship, not necessarily the most mature set of systems and processes on that high growth curve. And he said, hey, we really need to take a look at our leaders and our manager development and our leadership training. So even before the pandemic, he was already energizing our HR team to go in that direction and funding and putting the right investments in there. So now that is starting to come to fruition, and boy, what a great time, because you're 100% spot on. You do need to take care of your leaders. You do need to arm them to be sympathetic, empathetic, compassionate, caring, because that's important. And People join, the old adage, people join companies, people leave managers. Well, yeah, if no one's looking out for you, no one's taking care of you in all of this uncertainty and challenge that the world is facing right now, the last thing you want is some goofy manager making your life miserable.
Yeah.
So we're definitely tackling that company wide. And I always, I'll put my fingerprints on it. I'll put a little spin on it, but I try to take kind of the corporate level training and make it really real and relevant for our leaders that are in this customer support kind of customer facing scenario. To give them some relevant, like, this is how you would deal with frequent absenteeism. If you've got kind of an employee who's struggling with something, here's how you deal with an irate customer, and here's how you would, diffuse a situation. So trying to bring in our specific techniques in addition to how we're really trying to step up our game with our managers.
I mean, I think it's that's great. I mean, it sounds like a really kind of prescient move on the behalf of Bill McDermott and everybody at ServiceNow, because actually, anecdotally, I was speaking to a friend of mine the other day, and his wife runs a design-related kind of business group. So they support sort of design-led businesses, and they've just started that initiative where they basically sent an email out to a bunch of leaders in design-related businesses, and around how they're doing and so on and so forth, and they've organized a couple of sort of virtual get-togethers, and apparently the feedback has been incredible with the amount of people sort of sharing very kind of personal kind of stories and personal challenges, because being a leader, even in normal times, it can be quite a lonely place, and that we've got such exceptional circumstances. I'm just keen that people are thinking about that in thinking about them in this way, because they're not superhuman, as it were. They need support just as much as anybody else, and they don't necessarily have all the answers, and we're dealing with an extremely uncertain sort of time.
Well, and there's a balance there too. I think we felt it a little bit in the early days of this at ServiceNow, where you almost over-rotate to communicating too much, too many pass-down meetings, too many all hands, because you've got the best of intentions, but you just start gobbling hours up, during the workday. Now, the flip side of that, a video conferencing system, whichever, one your company chooses, it is a great democratizer, right? There is no big lush corner office. There's no big conference room where things are happening. You join that meeting, you're all on kind of that same level playing field. So I think we saw some pretty rapid decision-making, some efficiencies, and a cutting through red tape that was very beneficial, that hopefully we're still carrying through that today.
Yeah. And I mean, that's really cool. I mean, it sounds like you've kind of weathered the storm kind of like pretty well. I mean, it's not that you've got like a small team, Dean. I mean, there's 1,500 of you?
Yeah, pretty close. That's right in there.
And how many locations across the world?
Well, once 9, but you could call it now 1,500 separate ones, right?
Well, yeah, no, absolutely. But I mean, it's not a small kind of operation. I mean, is there anything else that you think actually this is a big thing that's emerged from us? Anything that we've missed out that you kind of want to share with the audience?
I would share, 2 things. One, customers. Well, we've never been more productive. You look at our case handling productivity measures, you look at our CSAT scores. We've never had a better quarter than the one we just had.
Wow, cool.
So somehow, some way, we're getting through it, we're grinding through it. And the one hypothesis I have is there's a lot of empathy from our customers right now, that when you open up that Zoom video conference and troubleshooting with that customer, the kids screaming in the background on their call, the kids screaming in the background on your call, the cat's walking across the keyboard. And you kind of see that and you're like, yeah, we're all dealing with this together, and, let's figure this out. There's a complete breakdown in walls and barriers in troubleshooting and getting a customer back in the fight. So I think that's been a positive in this. Another one I would say is we really double down on our self-service techniques
Right.
because customers, they don't want to call support. They don't
And oh
want
my
to
God,
talk.
have customers been asking for this for a long time?
Yeah, and they just don't want to deal. They want to get back to work. They want to make sure the system is up and operational.
Mm-hmm.
So we've focused a lot in how do we up our game in our kind of our self-service techniques so you don't have to call support. And then one other thing that we had on the roadmap that we deployed just by sheer coincidence during this has really been a game changer, and that is a mobile support interface. So what do I
Okay.
mean by that? So traditionally, a ServiceNow customer would show up on their desktop, and they would go to our self-service portal. They would look for knowledge articles, and they would submit a case, and then you would start working the case with our support engineer, on the phone or through video conferencing to fix it. Well, during this, we deployed a mobile option. So you download a little app to your device, and rather than have to sit in front of your monitor and type into a keyboard and be with your laptop or desktop that entire time as you're trying to get that case solved, well, now you can go pop open an adult beverage, you can go sit on the couch, you can go watch Ellen or your Netflix movie of choice, and you're getting your case updates, you're getting your case notifications, you're getting all of the information that our team's working on right at your fingertips. Wherever you may be, you don't need to be tethered to that computer anymore.
Right.
And in this pandemic, that's actually been pretty beneficial for everybody. It's like, yeah, I don't have to sit there where I've been sitting for the last 8 hours. I could actually go enjoy some family time. I can go take a walk.
Mm-hmm.
And you get your updates on that mobile device, which is really cool.
Awesome. So, Dean, within all of that sort of stuff, I mean, we know that there are people that are responding to this ever-changing environment in their own kind of like ways. But if I was to ask you to boil it down, because there's going to be other people that are just going like, oh, my head's feeling a little bit fuzzy. I'm not sure where to start, what to do next, what to focus on. I mean, if I was to say to you, what would be your best advice to somebody wanting to improve the service or experience they deliver to their customers? I mean, what would it be? What would you boil it down to?
Yeah, well, so my number one thing has not altered in the face of a pandemic, and anything, it's galvanized my feelings around this. And support fundamentally is a people-based business.
Mm-hmm.
You have a team that is empowered and trained to be the best, technicians, engineers, you name it in the world, to provide that great customer experience. You got to take care of them. And now more than ever, you really have to ensure you're taking care of them, that they're connected, they're informed, they've got all the tools and all the information at their fingertips to provide that great experience. So that's kind of number one. And then beyond that, things start falling off on, if you take care of your employee, provide a great employee experience, they're in turn going to provide that great customer experience. And what we've done over the last couple of months is really listen to our customers, ask the questions. What more can we be doing for you? What do you want us to do differently now that we're all kind of stuck in this environment? And listen to them, let them guide you onto what should be prioritized or what should be tweaked. And that has served us well too. So number one, focus on your employees, make sure they're ready for the fight. And then number two, listen to your customer. Let them tell you what you need to be doing differently as a result of what's happening around us.
Perfect. And so I tell you what, let's kind of like, we're in the middle of the maelstrom right now, Dean, although it seems to be, we're getting used to kind of choppier water, I think. This is, always the way, but I wanted to try and let's peer forward a little bit and help me kind of understand, your perspective on, what do you think the future of service looks like? And what do you think are the big challenges ahead? What's on your radar, as it were? Yeah,
so the big thing I am doing my best to refine and tackle and really get out in front of is, this whole concept of proactive support.
Right.
where the best case is no case. The best situation is you get in front of these issues before your customer ever even knows there's a wobble, and trying to refine that, trying to hone that. And with all the computing power and capabilities available to us today, with all the machine learning and AI technologies available, shame on you if you're not considering that and
Sure.
trying to do something there. So a lot of our effort, a lot of our innovation and spare cycles are going to how do we get out in front of these issues and anticipate these challenges before the customer ever has to show up at our doorstep and tell us we have a problem. And as a SaaS provider, we're in a unique position to be able to provide this because we've got all the computing capability. We can monitor the wazoo out of it. And so now it's on us to get in front of these issues before a customer does. So that's where a lot of the focus goes. Beyond that, I do think there's a war for talent out there. Getting the right engineers in the seats, and we talked about training and onboarding them and getting the best team in the world empowered, engaged, and ready to go. I think my number two is how do we become or continue to be that employer of choice, and we attract the right talent, we retain the right talent, and we provide a great experience with those great employees. Focus a lot on that too, because I don't, the traditional interning and recruiting methods and talent sourcing in this very virtualized world now, I try to look at it very optimistically. Like, we could tap into talent pools we never even thought were possible before in a very office oriented environment.
Sure.
Now the world is our oyster. We can go anywhere and do anything with anyone, and let's get the best people engaged.
Perfect. Dean, that's good. That's awesome. I mean, there's some really fascinating stuff, really useful sort of stuff in there. I mean, is there anything else that you'd like to add before I ask you a couple of final questions that are related to a piece of ongoing social research, let's call it, what I've been doing at the end of these podcasts?
No, I don't think anything jumps right out at me as anything ground we haven't covered. You focus right on that, the new hire orientation, the onboarding of employees. How do you do that? And then I would extend that to, there's other functions in a company. They're hiring, they're onboarding. You need to have relationships and coordination and collaboration then. So I think once you get your own backyard in order, and let's say you've hired and optimized the best support team in the world, how do you now virtually create that handshake and that collaboration environment with all of the other dependent functions you rely on? So that's another bridge I think we're gonna have to build and figure out over time, is how do you bridge these organizations virtually? That would be the only other thing I would bring up.
I think that's before we go into this last two questions, I think you make a really interesting point, because I always think that it was a friend of mine, James, kind of once said, and he's a bit of a service process improvement sort of data guy, and he said, that 90% of all the problems in service and that he sees probably come about, they occur in the gaps between teams and functions.
And very astute point of view. Yes.
And he said to me, and I said this, it feels a bit like the best analogy I can use to describe that is, it's a bit like a 400 meter, 4x100 meter relay team, where it's not about, the most successful team is not about having the fastest runners. It's the most successful team is the team that concentrates on getting the baton round.
Exactly.
Because that's where the greatest kind of risk of failure is at the baton handover. And I think it's an interesting way of thinking about it, but it throws also a lens on this idea that everybody's got to work together. And we talk about employee experience, but when we talk about external service and customer experience, we don't really talk very much about internal service and the sort of internal customer experience.
Right.
And I think that's an area that people should pay more attention to. And I also think it's going to make it harder, because we are working in this new sort of remote and increasingly becoming kind of hybrid environment. but it's an area I just think it's definitely worth attention. But it's not an easy nut to crack.
Completely agree.
Awesome. So, Dean, on to my two final questions. So, as I was explaining before we kicked off the interview, as I published a new book last year called Punk CX, and what I'm doing is I'm asking people sort of two things, and they're sort of bit like word and or brand association kind of questions. And the first question I've been asking people is, what one or two words would they use to describe a more punk approach to experience?
It's a great question. So here I am, a child of the late 60s, early 70s growing up, and those formative years, definitely listening to some punk bands. You think about maybe the Ramones, the Clash, Black Flag, the Dead Kennedys, way back when.
Yeah.
In trying to extrapolate that into kind of the here and now, the first word that comes to mind would be disruptive.
Right.
These bands, this sound, this music that was happening, at the time, and you think about, very, Chuck Mangione, Air Supply, pop radio at the time, and all of a sudden, boom, now you've got this punk scene emerging, disruptive. And I think of punk CX as, how do you knock those socks off that customer? You just wow them. And you have to throw a bunch of spaghetti against the wall. You have to try a bunch of things. You're going to fail on a bunch, but there's going to be a couple of things that it'll be new, it'll be innovative, and customers are going to love it. And it's unexpected and it's delightful.
Perfect.
So disruptive would be that first one that comes to mind.
I mean, I know that because I showed you I was compiling a list of all these words that I've been gathering. And disruptive is a word that's been kind of used before. But the thing that you said, which I'm going to add to my list because it says something ever so slightly different, is knocks the socks off.
That's right.
Because I think it's a really grounded sort of thing. You just go like, everybody will relate to like the idea of like, just knock the socks off it.
Yep.
So the next question is like, what company or brand do you think epitomizes that sort of approach?
Wow. Way back when, there were a couple of companies that I was just so impressed with, kind of the attention to detail. And I remember the very first time I was able to stay in a Four Seasons, and the attention to detail, the quality, the almost like the pervasive care that the entire staff provided throughout the entire stay, the smell of the room, the quality of the linen, you name it. That to me was just such a grand experience. And how can you do that at scale? How can you do that more affordably? How can you offer that attention to detail everywhere? So I think for me, the Four Seasons is that brand that embodies that for me.
Perfect. That's some great examples. Dean, that's brilliant. I mean, as I say, that's been fascinating, interesting, educational, inspiring, all of those kind of like words. I just wanted to say thank you for making the time to share your insights with us today. I mean, I've really enjoyed it, and it's been awesome.
Well, I appreciate it, Adrian. It's not every day you get the humble goat farmer who has the ability to share his passion for taking care of his employees and taking care of his customers. So that's what I do. That's what I love.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. One final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.